So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the coordinate plane system. Notice it's 4-1, which means it's chapter 4, section 1 in your textbook. All right, so you're going to see, we're going to leave chapter 1, we're going to go to chapter 4, we're going to pick up a few skills, and then we'll be coming back. So notice that it's going to fit nicely with our standards. We're going to be looking at tables of functions, which is 4C, and also 4D, which is graph of functions. So we're going to be using some of this information. All right. Let's go to the next page. Here's the coordinate plane system. When you do the coordinate plane system, make sure that you have arrows on your lines, all right, and also make sure they have hash marks. So like when you're graphing, you know where the hash marks are. Now I'm going to take my magnifying glass. You're going to notice that there's a dot in the middle of those lines. What name would we call that dot? It is called the origin. Okay. So if you're taking notes, you need to write that in. So that's the origin. Right? Let's take a look at the first line. It's the horizontal line. What name would we give that fancy horizontal line? It's the x-axis. Very good. So it has a fancy name. Again, make sure when you do those lines, you've got arrows on them, and make sure that you label them. Because in our examples, we're going to be doing two-dimensional, which is the x and the y-axis. But later on, when you get older, you're not going to just have the x-axis and the y-axis. You're going to have something called the z-axis. And that makes it three-dimensional. And it like shoots out right at you. When you take engineering classes specifically, you could be using that third axis. Okay. All right, the horizontal axis is your x-axis. Your vertical axis is going to be your y-axis, okay? Now, you'll notice that your x and y axis cuts the paper into 4 sections. What do we call the upper right-hand section? What do we call that? Quadrant 1. It is quadrant 1, and you'll notice that I use a Roman numeral. It's a big I. Make sure you use Roman numerals when you name those. It's like mispronouncing the name if you put like a 1 like we're used to. Right? Now, how would I take my magnifying glass and how would I move it if I want to get to quadrant 2? Am I going to go to the right or am I going to move down? Yes. I'm going to move to the left. Notice quadrant 2 has 2 I's, and they're capitalized I's. That's Roman numeral 2. All right, now I need quadrant 3. How would I move my magnifying glass? I'm going to move it down, and you'll notice quadrant 3 is going to have 3 I's. And finally, we have quadrant 4, cuatro, muy bien. And it's an I and a V, right? A lot of students, what they'll do is they'll do I, 4 I's. No, that's not how you do Roman numerals, okay? Don't do that, okay? It's an I and a V. If you put a regular 4, I'm not going to count it correct because that's not how they name it. Questions? All right, we're going to move on then, right? And we're going to give the coordinate of the point. So let's first start at A. When I do ordered pairs, I'm going to do a parenthesis, a comma, and a parenthesis. Which one comes first, the X or the Y? We're going to do X first and then our Y. Now, when we do ordered pairs, make sure that you add parentheses and a comma. It's kind of like punctuation in English. If you don't put punctuation and capitalize your stuff, it's going to look like a huge run-on, and it's not very good, is it? So same thing with math. We need that punctuation. We need those parentheses, and we need that comma. So let's take a look at A. What is this ordered pair then? 2, 2. So 2, comma, 2. Okay, note that I have parentheses and I have a comma between them. If I take a look at B, what ordered pair would that be? Very good. -6 and 2. Very good. Muy bien. Let's look at C. -3 and 3. Yes, you're right. -3, -3. Very good. Good, good save. All right, and then finally D, we've got 6, -6. All right, now you'll notice in quadrant 1, both X and Y are positive numbers. In quadrant 2, you'll notice the X is negative and the Y is positive. If you look in quadrant 3, you've got negative and negative, and in quadrant 4, you have a positive negative. And that's always when it's on those, in those quadrants. Okay, questions? All right, let's go to the next slide then. We're going to plot the point in a coordinate plane, and we're going to describe the location. So first of all, you'll notice at the bottom, I've got A, B, and C. Let's take a look at A. It's 0, 3. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to graph it, and I'm going to label it A. Now, where is that located? It's the y-axis. A lot of students, what they do is they'll place it wrong. They won't put it on the y-axis, they'll put it on the x-axis. If you have problems placing ordered pairs, there are apps on your iPad that I put, that butterfly brunch, and also that little car one that I gave you, all right? Those are great exercises for you. Please make sure you know how to do ordered pairs. Like, if you don't, the rest of the year will be painful. And next year when you go to geometry, you know, you're not going to look very smart, and you are smart, right? So make sure that you do that. Make sure you understand how to do ordered pairs. Even if it's 2 minutes a day, some practice on that. It's amazing what will happen if you do that, right? So make sure that you do that. Let's take a look at B. It's 1, -2. So I'm going to graph it as 1, -2. I'm going to put a dot and I'm going to put B. And where is B located? That is correct, quadrant 4. You can write just quad if you want to. I'll understand that. And then make sure that you use the I and the V together for 4. All right, and then finally, -3, -4. I'm going to graph it. I'm going to label it C. And where would that be located? Correct, quadrant 3. Are there any questions? I cannot tell you how important it is to know that X comes first and then Y and how to graph these. Later on when we do slope, slope-intercept form, I ask you what your y-intercept is. You need to know what the ordered pairs are and how to place them. It's huge. I would hate for you to do all this work and have all this beautiful math stuff and then graph it wrong, right? Because that should be the easier part. So make sure that you practice it with those apps if you're having difficulty. All right, let's go on. We've already set the stage on some of this stuff. So in the past lessons, do you remember us talking about domain and range? All right, so if I say domain, what are a couple other words or vocabulary that mean domain? Yes. Input, excellent. What's another word? Okay, my X, right? Absolutely. My X and my blank variable, my independent variable. Yes, those all mean my X, right? If I say range, what are some other words that mean range? Output, dependent variable, and my Y. The one that's hardest for everyone is the independent dependent variable. And we talked about that the other day. All right. So you should be good to go. Now, the other day, remember how I set the stage and we did tables like this? If you did what I asked you to do the last couple of lessons, this is super easy, right? That's why it's really important to keep up on your homework in algebra, because if you keep up on it, it's like, oh, this is super easy. I've done this before, and you can just go to town, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to put the x here, y equals 2x minus 4 here, and I'm going to put my y there, right? Notice that they gave you the domain. So they told you what values they want in. So I'm going to put in -2, y equals 2 times -2 minus 4, y equals -4 minus 4, and y gives me -8, right? And then I'm going to draw my line. Now, notice I'm still having a couple of you will skip the bottom 2 steps, like you don't do it at all. You put the first one, you pluck it in the calculator, and it's like jazz hands. Okay? Don't do that. I want to see the work, especially since you're in Algebra 1. I want to make sure that you're not just using your calculator and like, see, look what I can do, right? Do you understand it, and can you do it without that calculator, right? Now, later on, when you get to Algebra 2 and you get to pre-calculus, now you have some say in what you do. But right now, I really want to see that stop. I'm going to put in -3 because that's what they gave me. Again, I multiply first. It's that order of operations that we've done. I'm going to plug in my 0. Questions? We okay? Not okay? Okay. Note the work, because I'll keep handing it back to you till I get that work. It's really important. Now let's take a look at the problem. It says graph the function with a given domain. Have I graphed my function? I have not graphed my function yet. And then it says identify the range of the function. Did I identify the range yet? I have it, but I haven't identified it, right? And we've done that before. That was in the last lesson. So let's go ahead and let's identify this thing called the range, okay? I'm going to write range equals, and what am I going to write down? Absolutely, -8, -10, -4, and -2. And notice how nice and neat this is. That's why I like H tables. H tables are so awesome because I've got my X values, which are my domain. I've got all my work right here. So like if I mess up on my domain, I have my work right there, so I know where I messed up for my range. Okay, and my range is this category, my Y. Notice also I got my ordered pairs for graphing. I got -2, -8, -3, -10, 0, -4, and 1, -2. I got my graphing stuff all there. There's no guesswork. All right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to graph. All right? So my first value was what? Negative. Thank you. -2, -8. So I got -2, -8. It's going to go right there. Well, I hope. -2, -8, right there. Right? And then I had -3, what? -10. Very good. And then I had 0, -4. And I got 1, -2. Any other values? Okay. Now, here's the question of the day. Do I connect my dots? Yes or no, and why? Yes.
No.
No, why?
Because they're not showing. It's not the slope or whatever.
It's not the slope or whatever. That's okay. It's okay. I don't care if you're right or wrong. I just want to have the discussion. It's okay. Yes.
Not showing the direct variation or indirect variation.
I'm not showing the direct or indirect variation. Those are big words. Okay. Okay. Keep going. Let's keep going. I love all of those things. Let's keep having the discussion. Do I or do I not connect the dots, and why? No? Why? Because my teacher last year told me that I don't. It's unconstitutional. Okay, thank you very much. No. You're silly. All right. I had students last year tell me, Mrs. Medvick, you do, because every time I see dots, I want to connect them and make a pretty picture. We do that, don't we? We see the dots and I'm like, ooh, I got to connect those because that's fun, right? Yeah, a lot of kids said that last hour. I'm like, yeah, you're human. Of course you want to connect those dots. The answer is no, right? We're not going to connect these dots. And this is why. It all stems back to the domain. If you take a look at the domain, do you see how they ask for -2, -3, 0, and 1? Do they care about -1? They don't care about it. They didn't ask for it. Did they ask for 2? No, they don't care about 2. Did they ask for -4? No, they don't care about those values. They only care about these. And so when they only ask you for a certain location, you don't connect the dots. All right? So let's make note on that. Don't connect the points when given numbers for the domain. All right? You're not going to connect them. Now, there's going to be a time where you get to choose the domain. And when you get to choose, and you can have any number you want, that's when you connect the dots. That's when you start, we have the conversation about rays and lines and those types of things. But right now, we're not there. I'm not going to let you choose whatever you want. I'm telling you, you have to choose only these numbers. I mean, it's okay. I'll live with it. All right? Any questions about that? All right, let's go on then. We're going to look at our assignment for today. It's going to be on page 209. And you go, Mrs. Medvick, we haven't gone to the 200s yet. What are you doing to me? Remember, it is chapter 4, section 1. We're skipping in your books. And the reason why is we're going to do some major graphing, and I want to make sure you get those ordered pairs. All right? And I want you to do problems 1 through 25. Now, I know that looks like a lot. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, Mrs. Medvick, seriously, 25 problems. They're ordered pairs. It's ordered pairs, and it's pretty basic. Now, I'm going to give you some graph paper. If ever you need graph paper, at the back of my room in this little white bin, there's tons of graph paper, just tons. You can come to my room anytime, before school, after school, study hall, anytime. You are welcome to come to my room and get graph paper, all right? Some kids will say, Mrs. Medvick, can I just grab 5 sheets like right now? Because then I don't have to come up and I'll always have it. Sure. Or I was at home and I didn't have graph paper, so I printed off my own. Is that okay? Sure, absolutely. Or Mrs. Medvick, I didn't have a printer and I didn't have any graph paper. I made it on my own sheet of paper. Is that okay? Sure. Right now, that's fine. That's fine. It's just if you're going to draw your own axes, those axes need to have arrows. They need to have labels. You need to be kind of careful, right? Now, another thing I want to bring to your attention is sometimes your axes, sometimes they cross right in the middle. Sometimes, you know, they look like this. Sometimes your axes look better like this. Sometimes they look like this. So don't get too used to just putting it, you know, the intersection right in the middle of your paper. Don't do that. And of course you label them. I'm, you know, being lazy right now. I'm putting my axes. Make sure you do this. Make sure you label it with X and Y's. Make sure you put, you know, hash marks. All right. Another thing that some of my students do is they'll take a highlighter for their axes. And that's how they make it dark. And you can see it, but I can still put a dot on it and it's not like mushed, like with the line. So some students will do that. They'll take a highlighter and they'll highlight all their axes on their paper and then they'll graph it. If they make a mistake, they can erase, but the axis is still there. All right? But you want to make your axes nice and dark. Are there questions? Okay, I'm going to give you some time to work that.